I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar series, and today the topic of our discussion will be about redevelopment of brownfield sites and opportunities for public and private partnerships in brownfields redevelopment. I'd like to start with an introduction to our program. Most of you're already familiar with our services and what we offer in EPA Region 1, which is essentially New England. But just to give a brief overview of our team and acknowledge here our program director, Professor Chrysokou, myself, and also our colleague Randy Mendez. We're working together with an interdisciplinary team to offer technical assistance on brownfield redevelopment across communities in New England. Together with us, we also have three other professors from UConn: Professor Parek, who is the community engagement lead, Professor Wakai, who is our public health expert, and Professor Dixon, who is essentially providing feedback with respect to land use. In a nutshell, our services with respect to the technical assistance that we offer to communities, you can always reach out to us with a question as we actually offer this through our direct services.
To 19 Temple Street.
If you can please mute yourselves, because right, the meeting is set up as make sure everyone is muted. All right, so our services, as I mentioned, you can always reach out to us with a technical question, and we're happy to go over, your project, see where you might have questions or any related, let's say, funding-related questions or other technical questions associated with brownfield redevelopment. We also offer the Municipal Assistance Program in coordination with the service-based learning activities of the Brownfields redevelopment course at UConn, where essentially the municipalities participate to the program and receive assistance through the activities of the course with respect to, for example, a preparation of EPA grant proposals and other technical projects such as inventories, data gap analysis, and other projects that our team and our students support. We also have a continuing education program where, for example, the webinars that the webinar that we offer today is part of that program, together with short courses and other workshops. And of course, we also have our community engagement services. Just to provide a little bit more detail with respect to the technical assistance and the type of questions, the type of services that we support. As I mentioned, you can always reach out to us with questions on like technical documents, environmental documents that might be those lengthy documents, that have highly technical information, and we can help summarize those documents, understand, and provide guidance with respect to what is the next step on, with respect to your brownfield. And of course, we do support reviews for brownfields proposals for EPA's program, but also for the state programs when they are available. And we do provide access to resources, fact sheets, example proposals, other documents, templates for RFQs, RFPs, and of course, we are always available, as I mentioned, to answer any questions that you might have. You can always, all the information is available on our website, and together with all the activities that we support, additional resources, and also previous webinars. So we do record all our webinars, and we post the recording on the website. So you can always go back to the website. If you missed the webinar, you can always go back to our website and see the information there. So today, it's our pleasure to have two guest speakers for our webinar. And I would like to introduce, first of all, John Gumbert, who is the founder and the president of Camden Management Partners. Camden is a management company with a wide range of multifamily developments, including the historic redevelopment of large industrial properties into residential projects. Camden has been instrumental in the development of over 1 billion, wow, 1 billion in real estate projects, and currently has approximately more than 350 million in historic redevelopment in process. And at the same time, we also have a second guest speaker, Sean Gately, who is the Director of Development Services for the town of Vernon in Connecticut, and has been there in this capacity since 2011. Sean has a master's in organizational leadership and has extensive experience in business development, government operations, client retention, land use, sales, and many more. So in his current role, Sean has successfully applied for and overseen the implementation in over 15 million in grant funding and shepherded several hundred million in development projects. So I would like to thank you both for joining us, for our webinar and for our discussion today. Let me actually stop sharing my screen here. And I had the pleasure to work with Sean and John since, I want to say it was back in 2022, when all of us worked together on Danielsville, and we're still working together. So, and just, for a brief, background of how all of us work together, essentially, Sean had applied to our municipal assistance program to receive assistance with a cleanup grant, with an EPA cleanup grant for Daniels Mill in Vernon. Our program was involved with that project, and our students were involved in the grant preparation and worked together with Sean and John to essentially provide input with respect to the grant. And that's when our collaboration started. But since then, we also had additional discussions with respect to the grant management, the program, the management of the project. So I thought it would be a great opportunity for us today to have this webinar and kind of like discuss some of the topics that we have been discussing, in the previous conversations. So with that, I would like to start the discussion. The way we have structured this today is I'll essentially, I have some questions for our speakers. And we have two perspectives here, right? We have the developer's perspective and we have the town's perspective. So I'll be asking the questions, and essentially then we can, all of us, have a discussion at the end. So first of all, I would like to ask John of, what is the motivation, behind investing in brownfields redevelopment? Why invest in a brownfield and not in a greenfield?
So the brownfields that we are typically investing in are historic textile mills or historic office buildings. And they come with a corresponding historic tax credit that helps fund the redevelopment. But secondly, they're well located within the various municipalities, and they're just interesting structures. So what we found is that once we redevelop those structures, utilizing the brownfield grants as well as the historic tax credits, that we're able to they're very highly sought after by our ultimate end users, which are the residents that occupy those projects. It's also a great way to do a public-private partnership where you have a lot of encouragement and a lot of participation from a bunch of different folks within the community. So it's they're very interesting buildings and sites. They're well located, and you're taking what is otherwise a abandoned, unused property and turning it into something that is highly desirable.
Mm-hmm. And from the town's perspective, why is this important to target those sites?
Bluntly, I'm not sure we have a another choice. We've inherited these from our pasts, and they remain. They're not going away. So it's important for us to return these underutilized parcels back to the tax rolls, and that won't happen without a combined effort of a lot of different parties. So it's, I'll say it's a public-private partnership, but it's not possible without a variety of different public agencies getting involved. So that's state, local, federal, etc. And there's only a finite amount of land, so maximizing what's available is important.
And I mean, from the discussions I previously had with different municipalities and even nonprofit organizations, there's always the question, right? How do we find a developer? How do we start? What are the first steps? So what are the key steps, the first key steps to basically determine if a project is feasible? How do you approach this when starting a project like that?
What I would say is the community leaders know best probably what use they want to see put in place. And I would think that from there, the best start is to just commission a demand study through a third party, market demand company, and see what they come back with, because it's a way to market to developers. My approach is residential, multifamily residential, because that to me is the least controversial use. So if you say, well, I want to develop a restaurant, well, you're taking a lot of risk. Residential is something that is pretty well supported by the lending community. So it's the easiest use. So I think the first start is, have a demand study. It's not expensive. Have a demand study done to prove out what you think you'd like to see developed in that space. And then beyond that, you certainly want to do the environmental studies just to see how much heavy lifting there is to, as a second step. Once you've got your demand assembled, then try to figure out what type of environmental hurdles you'll have to cross. And then, you're looking to do, from the town's perspective, an economic impact study. And I think Sean can speak to that.
I want to make sure I was still unmuted. Yeah, I think the impact study is essential to gain support. It's quite common. There are always asks associated with this, whether it's assistance with grant funding or tax credits or establishing a TIF district. And you need to show the benefits and the costs associated with it, or you're not going to get the support that you need. It's critical that the projects are well vetted. We just can't wish and hope that the developers are going to come, or the town's vision has legs. So I'll go back to what John said earlier. It's been my experience, government doesn't always know best. Sometimes the market is what needs to drive the reuse of these projects, but that the government putting in, or local government putting in certain controls may be the best spot for them. We'd love to tell John we want 3,000 jobs to be created in this project. That's not what is really going to happen.
So going back to thank you both. Going back to those studies, do you have a sense of the cost, of the approximate cost to conduct those studies? Because you mentioned that the cost is not that high. I was just wondering, do you have a sense of, approximately how much this would cost for a municipality?
I would say one other thing I'd add to it before that is we have a tremendous success or track record for turning these projects around, and we're not alone in that. There are many developers who have transformed these abandoned facilities into really positive projects. So you can always refer back to that and say, look, all these other towns have done this type of redevelopment, and all these other towns have had tremendous success resulting from that. Both, you're looking at, I get that the building you're redoing is now vastly improved, but so is the area the building's in. So there's a spillover effect that reaches far beyond your project. And that's important to show the community because you need community buy-in. As far as the cost to do the initial studies, you're probably going to spend, upwards of $10,000 for the demand study and probably upwards of another $10,000 for your initial environmental studies would be my guess. So it's not much money on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the impact study, it really depends on the models or how in depth you want to get, what model you use, whether it's implant or RIMS or a variety of the other ones. We've gotten quotes for $80,000, and I think the one we used on this project, the town has purchased implant software, so I'm able to do some low-level analysis myself, but I think we commissioned a company out of Massachusetts, I believe it's Cayman, to do this one, and I think that was $8,000.
Mm-hmm. And
the key is to do those studies, though, because it gives you a foundation for which to build the project. So your market demand study is going to be required by any lender. And ultimately, you're going to be trying to persuade a lender to invest money into the project, as well as investors for the tax credits, and variety of debt providers, bridge loan providers. So it all comes down to the viability of the project. So those studies are really the basis for what you're doing.
And that demand study is specific to the desired end use.
Yes.
Right. So the community or the town would have to choose first what is going to be the end use scenario, and then do a demand study on that particular scenario.
Yeah, I think you would look for developers to put forward ideas on what they would do with your property, and then you would ask for a demand study to come back and prove out how
Mm-hmm.
viable that is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's
absent developers, I would probably default to coming up with your own idea of what you'd like to see there and see if you can get a demand study to validate that.
And the reason why I'm asking is because essentially, market studies are also eligible activities under EPA grants. So a municipality could budget essentially funds to do a market study if they have a good redevelopment plan. So I'm trying to understand, okay, well, do we need to have a scenario first, a potential reuse first, and then do the market study for that particular scenario? Or is it something that the developer would do anyways before they start investing in a project?
Well, the developer might, but I think or the developer should. I see a lot of developments where they didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just assume the demand was there, and that's not a great idea. You want a third-party analyst to back up your assertions that it'll be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that may be a way to attract a developer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we have also a comment from the audience that if the end use is unknown, a full market analysis considering multiple end uses, can be approximately from 30K to 50K. So that is another information, another option that perhaps the municipalities have to do a full market analysis for multiple uses.
Right.
So since we're discussing the financials, what are the other key aspects to determine that financial viability of a project, besides the first status? Then we move into, okay, is this project financially viable, feasible? What are the other considerations there?
Well, once you've determined the product you're going to build, then you can put it, and once you have a demand study that tells you, what it'll support. So in the case of residential, what will the rents be, and what will the absorption be, then you can start your model from there. And then you're looking to fill gaps in that model. Mm-hmm. So you might be looking for tax abatement for some period of time. We typically do. You'd be looking in our case for historic tax credits, both state and federal, other grant opportunities. And at the end of the day, those units are only going to rent for so much. So everything else has to fit in place. Along with that, you're having to estimate what your costs are going to be to bring the project back into shape. So that's just an economic model that you do once you have that base information.
Mm-hmm. And from the town's perspective, and how the town could work together with a developer, what are some other, let's say, opportunities to leverage funding for specific projects?
So John mentioned some of them. Obviously, cooperation and assistance in seeking funding, grant funding, or what have you. But the willingness to be creative with taxes. So if as I said before, if it's a tax incremental financing district, or if it's tax abatements, they're essential. They're needed, but they're not going to make the project viable on their own. So it has to make sense. It has to pencil out. If it doesn't, as John said, it's not a project. So maybe great ideas and great vision, but if the demand isn't there, if it's not going to be right side up at the end, then it's time to find a new plan.
And if we use as an example Daniel's Mill, I know that the town, for example, has, the cleanup grant, the EPA cleanup grant, was awarded. You also have state funding from the Department of Economic and Community Development. Are there other pools of funding, either from the private aspect or from the public aspect, that you are leveraging to make this project feasible?
Well, it starts with the demand study, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to convince a lender and an investor to commit to the project. So it absolutely starts with a demand study. It's aided by the fact that there are a lot of examples where these projects work very well. So the end product is typically in high demand. So that helps you. But the basic financial model has to work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key, is to put that model in place. You can do all the studies and all the architectural renderings, anything you like, but if the base model doesn't work, you haven't really gotten very far.
So the basic financial model is essentially something like a capital stack that need to essentially provide funding sources for to cover the cost,
Yes.
right? And also making sure that the end use would produce the necessary, let's say, return on investment to determine if a project is viable.
That's right. So in our case, it's a debt coverage ratio. So the project pays its bills and cash flows something in case there's a economic downturn or what have you. And again, residential is easy because it's so readily done, and there's so many examples of it. When you get into other uses, that becomes more challenging, I believe. So if you want to put a hotel in or a restaurant or something like that, that's a whole nother set of challenges.
Mm-hmm. So now that you mentioned challenges, are there any red flags when you consider, let's say, engaging in a project?
Well, I think first and foremost, you want to make sure that you're developing something that the community wants. You cannot fight the community. If they don't want a certain product that you're talking about putting in, you really are not going to overcome that. So you want to make sure that the community really supports what you're doing. And if they don't, then you have to keep proposing it until you either win their support or don't. But that is a red flag for sure. Secondly, you'd like to know that the project is really financially viable, because you're going to have things to overcome all the way through the process. But if it's financially viable, you can overcome those things. And I will tell you, it takes time. This is not a quick process at all. And you gotta be very careful and what monies you're spending, because it's a long process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And since you mentioned the community as one of the most important as the most important process to basically support what you're doing, how do you go about engaging the community in this process, and what is their how do they provide input?
We very much enjoy a public-private partnership. So we engage with the mayors, we engage with the development directors, and really get our lead from them. Do they think it's a viable product and something the community would support? And then we typically have numerous community outreach where we're proposing what it is we're talking about doing. You just take the temperature of the community. Is it something that they want? But it's a lot of engagement is the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm. And Sean, would you like to provide some comments with respect to engaging the community?
Yeah. So your original question, are there red flags? There are too many red flags to really go into it. So from the town side, we're always looking for a willingness to invest, and that's on our side as well as the developer side. If they've if it looks too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. I also received numerous calls for this week from real estate brokers saying they have a guy who really wants to redevelop some brownfield sites. 3 questions, and you quickly realize they've never done it before. This isn't going to be something they're going to be able to handle, and you can thank them and redirect them. And as John said, if there isn't community will, then you might be dead in the water. I can only speak for us. We the second in 2011, we started working on community will, and in fact, it's probably been worked on prior to that. That's when I started, and immediately it became, we know these mills are not going to be long for this world in their current state. So how do we address the next phase of their life? And that is public outreach. It's workshops. It's public meetings. It's that dialogue of starting. And as I said before, you'll get some real harebrained ideas of what it should be. And you can go through it, you can vet them, you can look at it, and at the end of the day, if it doesn't pencil, you have to move on to something that works. Everything we do is public engagement. Every meeting we have is open to the public. Community notices, publishing in the newspaper. Everything we do is to try to entice the public to participate and communicate and share their thoughts, so there isn't a surprise later on. So that's how we approach it: is continually make everything as open and transparent as possible. And quite often you'll have a meeting and nobody will show up. Nobody will come from the public to comment because they've seen everything, they've heard everything, and they have some confidence. That's not always the case, but we found that to be part of a lot of our outreach. Is we have a hard time dragging people to participate.
That's actually very, very common across, from the engagement that I've seen, across, different towns. It's very hard to engage people and for them to attend the meetings at 7 p.m. at night. So it is a difficult process. Going back to what you mentioned with respect to the financial feasibility and the importance of having those studies, and I'm referring to the environmental studies, besides the demand study and the impact study. So with respect to the environmentals, would you engage in a project where, for example, you have some information, perhaps a phase 1 investigation or a phase 2 investigation, but let's say we don't have all the known factors with respect to the cleanup, or we don't have, let's say, the cleanup funding covered by a grant? Would you engage in a project and cover those cleanup costs from, let's say, private investment, or is that something that you prefer not to do?
I think it just depends on the asset you're talking about. I mean, we have plenty of projects where we fund the cleanup cost or part of the cleanup cost as a cost of the development. So it really depends on how much how much room there is in the financing of the project. But if you have a well-located site with high demand, you can generally figure out how to take care of the costs through layered financing and other things, grants, you name it. So just because there are environmental problems does not scare me away. In fact, I've had, I own a project in Knoxville, Tennessee, that's on the river, and we transformed a petroleum tank farm into an apartment complex on the river looking back at the city. It's a fabulous project. And when we were putting it together, I had plenty of lenders say, this site is contaminated, go find another site. Well, I said, no, I like this site. This site is great. It's on a river. It's looking back at the city. So I want to do this site. And the environmental problems, which were significant, did not dissuade us from doing the project. We got the city of Knoxville to contribute a certain amount of TIF funds to us. And with that, we were able to fill the gap and get the project done. And that was, 10 years ago. And today it's just a great project. So I don't think environmental issues by themselves are going to scare you away from the project. And the other side of it is some buildings are in better shape than other buildings. So the worst structural component of one building may be some of the better components of another building. So there's all kinds of different cost issues associated with these projects, but I wouldn't single one out and just say, well, if it's got an environmental problem versus a structural problem, we would just say, no, we don't want to do it. So you have to evaluate it from that perspective. But if your demand is there, you're pretty incented to figure it out.
Mhm. And we actually have a follow-up question from Jill with respect to that demand study. If for a smaller populated areas, we could do a regional study to show that demand. Have you seen this before?
Yes. Yeah, we do a lot of our projects are in tertiary towns and cities that are within, call it 20 miles of a bigger population. And so we just have our demand analyst widen the search area, and they know, what's realistic and what's not. So you can, we do plenty of industrial sites in small areas.
And at this point, I would like to actually open the discussion to the audience, and feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions that you might have, or you can post the questions in the chat. We still have a little bit of time if we have more questions. Well, it's your opportunity to ask questions to a developer. You don't get that opportunity often, I want to say.
Hi. Go ahead.
Jill?
Hi, yeah, this is Jim Byrne. I was wondering, John, do you have a minimum square footage you look for in terms of a brownfield site to redevelop, like an old mill or manufacturing facility, or is it just basically, what the economics of the area are and what goes into developing that?
Well, for sure, the economics of the area and what it will support. We have a minimum number of units, which is probably, for me, 100 units.
Okay.
But we're able to add new structures around existing historic structures. So we can increase the density by doing that, and we often do that.
Jill, did you also have a question for our speakers?
Yeah, with the volatility of the interest rates, these projects take quite some time to move forward. How do you compensate for that? Over the interest rates from last year to this year can make a viable project dead in the water.
Well, you're right. And that's why I say to everybody, it's a long process. Interest rates absolutely impact what you're doing. The whole banking system today, with the regional banks coming under pressure, has really locked up, the whole financing process, but it doesn't last forever. So, this isn't an 2008 scenario. This is what's probably going to be a mild recession. And it is going to impact what you do. We're trying very hard to close 2 development deals over the next 30 days. And I think we're going to get those done. We've been impacted by higher interest rates for sure. You have to have, on these projects, you really have to have a long-term perspective. As you point out, you will be impacted by the turbulence of the financial market, and we're certainly seeing that. But there are worse stories out there than ours. Yes, we're trying to get our projects closed, and rates going up, is complicating that. However, if you've got an existing real estate project and you're having to refinance because you have a loan coming up, that's a much bigger problem. So, you have to have thick skin and just understand, if it starts raining, it's not going to rain forever, and if it stops raining, it's not going to be clear forever. So you're going to have, you just have to be committed to the project.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? I have one last, quick question with respect to the time frame, because you mentioned that, you need to have a long-term vision and long-term plan. Is there a specific time frame where, for let's say a typical project, you would look for start making profit, or start, kind of like, breaking even? Is it like 10 years? Is it 15 years? Do you have kind of like a rule of thumb for, some of the projects, or that depends on the project and the different parameters associated with that?
Well, I think what I would tell people is you're going to be in it for 3 years at least, is an average period of time before you get the initial construction phase closed. And then you can start construction. So you're starting to lease up in 5 years. Once you lease up, which is, maybe a year after that, you'll start to, you should start to cash flow some. So, you're looking anywhere, I would say, from 5 years, and that could be extended out to 10 years, depending on if you go through an economic down cycle or what have you, that causes problems in the lending side, which sounds like a tremendous long period of time. But once you get these projects done, they also last forever. So you have to, in my opinion, you have to have a very long-term perspective. 5 years would be the quickest, and I think probably 10 years is a good rule of thumb. But they'll be around for the next 100 years. So I think they're well worth doing. But it's a long-term process. Having historic tax credit equity and a number of the grants and so forth, you're not supporting traditional equity typically, and that's a help. So you really don't have a gun to your head to do something. And we're typically financing with agency debt, so that's 30 and 40-year loan products.
I see that you have your...
Yeah. Sean, from the town's perspective, you talked a little bit about, the financial incentives you can give a developer coming in for a brownfields. Now, in terms of, like building codes and zoning regs and things like that, how flexible are cities and towns in getting a development in that they really want in terms of, modifying or changing those types of codes and regulations?
So not very flexible on building and fire codes, but the zoning codes are something that I would encourage everyone to look into in advance. So we had done several years back, an adaptive reuse provision of our zoning codes, which allows us to define the properties that we think we might have trouble with, a certain age, a certain size. Again, we have Rockville is a mill town, and it's got a bunch of mills that don't fit into the current zoning. So reusing those could be a challenge if we didn't have this catch-all of adaptive reuse that applies, saying if it makes sense, if it fits, if it's not disruptive to the community, then anything goes. Whatever you might that you might be able to fit into here, if it actually fits, then it's something that we would encourage. So as I said, we certainly wouldn't make exceptions to the building code or the fire code or anything health and safety, but the zoning is the community needs it to be redeveloped, so they have to treat it that way and make sure that the developer has some leverage as well on what they can put in there. I hope that answered your question, Jim.
It depends on the municipality. I mean, I've had fire marshals be my biggest advocate, and they've worked with us wherever they can. And I've had building departments write new regulations, rehab codes, things like that, to work with us any way they can. So it can be, you certainly want to engage with those folks, and you certainly want to discuss what problems you've got. And, I always find, for example, in a town we're doing now in the Northeast, the fire marshal addressed the planning commission and just said, look, this is much better than leaving the building the way it is. I think we should do everything we can do to get this redeveloped. So, there's always flexibility. There's common sense, I think, that helps out everybody.
And we also have one more question from Ashley, which I think is a great question. If health impacts are factored into the suitability for a project, have you seen a study, like, for example, a health impact assessment before, or have you done any kind of studies similar to that?
Sure. I mean, we do risk-based analysis to determine, what's the chance that if you have an underground storage tank, that's going to impact. Can that get to the people living in the building? Mm-hmm. So we do some of those analysis for sure. That's all part of the, at the end of the day, we're not going to start the project until we have effectively a no further action from the state agency or the EPA. Mm-hmm. So we absolutely look at that. That's a big part of all the environmental testing you're doing.
Right. So the cleanup process itself is a risk-based approach, right? It's a risk-based study where you evaluate if and because we never clean up a site 100%, there's always some kind of leftover contamination that might be present there. So essentially we evaluate if that's going to have an impact to if it's safe for the end users and the residential community to use the site after the suggested cleanup. But there are also additional studies, the health impact assessment studies that I've seen for different projects. And those were not specifically for for brownfield redevelopment projects, but essentially, I remember that one of the EPA studies, health impact assessment for renovations at a school, it wasn't a brownfield, it was still an active school. And essentially, it was an extensive study that was evaluating what would be the health outcome for each type of renovation that they were suggesting to do, which was an interesting concept. And we haven't seen that a lot, at least in brownfield redevelopment. So that is something else that perhaps we can, look more into those studies. Let me see, do we have any other questions? Anybody else from the audience have any other questions for our speakers? All right, so I would like to thank you both, and actually thank you everyone for joining us for our webinar today. It was our pleasure to have John and Sean share their experience and expertise with respect to public and private partnerships. And as I mentioned, the webinar is recorded, and all the materials will be uploaded on our website. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, folks.